Welcome, everyone. I'm Heather Bradley. I'm the director of the Center for Nonprofit Resources based in Toledo, Ohio, and I'm delighted to have some experts with us. The Ohio Attorney General's Office are great friends of the center, particularly the Charitable Law section. And today I have two wonderful guests with me. One is Beth Short. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you for having us.
And the other is Abby Jacobs. Welcome, Abby.
Hi, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that there is a lot of shifting and transition in the nonprofit community, and I really appreciate you taking the time to help shed some light or gain some clarity for nonprofit leaders who will be watching this to be able to start to make sense of where do we go from here. So are we both ready to jump in?
Sure.
Okay, so what kind of impact are you seeing on the nonprofit community due to this health crisis in Ohio?
Heather, I think this is going to be a really painful period for our charitable sector here in Ohio. Everyone is trying to figure out what's the new normal for now as we live our personal lives, but I think it's even a bigger challenge for the wide range of charities that we have in this state who are offering all kinds of valuable programs and services. And so they've been trying to cope as best as they can with trying to understand the health orders that we're all bound to. And many of them have had to close down and stop giving the programs and services that have created ongoing revenue streams for them to handle their ongoing expenses, which has created a huge pinch for many of them. Arts groups, for instance, can't provide the shows and concerts and theater experiences, but yet still have to pay costs associated with running those facilities. So there are all kinds of ways that the health orders are impacting our charities, some of whom can't do the things that their mission calls them to do. They'll get back to being able to do that hopefully at some time. And then other groups are being called upon to be on the front lines of responding to the most vulnerable in our community. And many of them are finding that they have far bigger need because of the virus situation than they've ever had before, and are trying to find ways to be the most responsive they can to their communities. And then you layer on top of that the health crisis that affects many of their volunteers and the way they provide services. Many of our volunteers may be among the vulnerable population that we want to stay isolated and stay safe. So people are figuring out all kinds of new ways to deliver programs. But the real kicker for many of them is they've had to cancel fundraising activities that might have been major fundraisers that they rely on for the whole year. And then we have their donor base may be suffering financial consequences because of, businesses closing down. The stock market is down. And so this is going to be a real tough time and call for commitment and strategic thinking on the part of our charitable leaders. And I also think it's a time for those of us who are able to help to be involved in many ways, to really step up and help those charities that we care about now, because they may need us now more than ever before. So it's going to be tough, but we have already seen some really inspiring and creative ways that charities have already made adjustments, and we should all, I'm a huge fan of the charitable sector, on a good day, but in these difficult days, the more of us that can step forward and be helpful, particularly financially at this time, I think the better.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of the same things locally here. So thank you for those observations, Beth. Are there any particular concerns that your office is concerned with as related to charitable organizations?
Well, whenever there is a disaster of any sort, it seems to be a magnet for con artists and those who are willing to take advantage of the generosity of others. And so there is no doubt that there will be fundraisers popping up all over in all different sorts of ways. There are a number of organizations, mainline organizations in communities all over the state who have developed special COVID-19 fundraising appeals to try to provide some assistance to those that may need it most. But we also expect to see Joe and Sue Schmo pop up doing GoFundMe campaigns to help buy masks for their local first providers or something like that. Many times those start out as being well-intentioned efforts, but I can assure you that in every disaster situation, and we've never had one that affects everybody at the same time like this one, most of the disasters we think of are weather-related or violence-related, unfortunately. So this is everywhere, and there will be people who will pop up doing GoFundMes, and that money will never get to where the donors actually thought they were going to go. And so we want people to be wise donors about how they respond to those kinds of appeals. Our office is trying to be very aggressive in reaching out to each of those that we identify on primarily the online platforms. So when you're raising funds for a broad charitable purpose, you need to register with our office because you have created a charitable trust. And we're going to reach out proactively and share with people the absolute importance of keeping records about how money is coming in and how money is going, so that we don't have to respond to this 9 months down the road in an investigation and an enforcement case. So people need to be mindful of that. There are a lot of well-intentioned folks who have very generous motives, but I can assure you there are some that will use this as an opportunity to take advantage of others and help themselves instead of anyone else. So we're always concerned about that in these kinds of times.
Yeah, so great advice. Well, we certainly don't want investigations 9 months from now, do we?
No, we don't.
Are there suggestions that your office is making to charities that are currently operating during this unusual time?
These times create all kinds of challenges. So many times people have shut down churches, for instance. Most churches are not meeting, and so we have a building that is in lockdown, may or may not have folks coming in and out like general. They still need to be very careful about internal controls. You can't just have mailboxes going unattended because there may well be checks that are coming in, and you don't want to create an opportunity during these tough times to allow someone to easily take advantage of your organization. So now more than ever, charitable leaders should be thinking about their internal controls to make sure that even during these odd times, there's a process in place that protects their assets and their ongoing financial activities of the group. So this doesn't mean stop minding the bank accounts and stop minding the checking accounts. It may be an even more important time, and you may need to reevaluate given these, unforeseen circumstances that none of us could have ever guessed about. Are we crossing the T's and dotting the I's? Because it's not a good time to let someone in to take advantage of others. And so there's other issues as well that are coming up in the life of charities during this stay-at-home order, including how do we as a board meet and do business when we can't get together in a group. And Abby, could you talk a little bit about what some of those meeting provisions, how they could change for charities from what they're accustomed to and what charities can indeed think about doing?
Sure. So obviously we're all social distancing, and we need to figure out how we can still meet if the organization is still continuing to function. And so one of those considerations is, can we meet virtually, right? So can we do it over phone or over Zoom or over Skype or over email? How can we continue to operate? And so first you want to look at your governing documents to determine if that's something you're permitted to do, right? To check out, is this something we thought about ahead of time and we put in our documents? If not, or even if so, you're going to look at Chapter 1702 of the Ohio Revised Code. And in there, it talks about all sorts of things about how you can conduct your organization, including can you do these kinds of virtual meetings, and can you even vote virtually, right? So in short, the answer is, if your governing documents don't prohibit you from doing this, then you can absolutely have these virtual meetings as long as you can communicate contemporaneously. So that means things like Skype and Zoom and phone conversations will work very well because you can obviously have a back and forth conversation. Similarly, as long as your governing documents don't prohibit it, you can hold votes virtually as long as you can contemporaneously communicate. Now, if your governing documents say that you can't do this, and they specifically prohibit it, office will talk through some options with you and see if we can figure something out.
Yeah, so if people have questions and they're facing those kinds of quandaries, the best thing to do is drop an email to our office at charitablepelaw@ohioattorneygeneral.gov, and we'll be happy to talk through some alternative approaches that can ensure that the charity is able to continue operating responsibly given this emergency situation we're under.
Thanks for that offer, Beth, and we'll make sure that that email is listed as part of the blog post with this interview. So to state the obvious, there will be financial strains put on these charities. What are some of the things charities should be considering as they find financial solutions?
Well, all charities ought to be monitoring all the various relief efforts that are going on that we're hearing Governor DeWine talk about, and also at the federal level. And one of the best ways to do that is to monitor the coronavirus.ohio.gov webpage, which is the state of Ohio's comprehensive listing of all things coronavirus. And it includes issues from the Ohio Department of Health about the various orders, various health-related issues about how to protect people from spreading or getting the coronavirus. But it also importantly has information for employers about various kinds of relief along the tracks of workers' comp insurance, unemployment insurance, those sorts of things. So any charity that has employees ought to be closely monitoring that page so they can make sure that they are aware of what provisions have been made so they can take advantage of those. The Small Business Administration has also developed a loans program that charities indeed qualify for. And I think they're doing an excellent job with the coronavirus.ohio.gov webpage to try to make it a go-to spot for individuals, for businesses, for charities. There's useful information on there that as a charitable leader you ought to be mindful of. And I have a suspicion, Heather, that you are tracking that sort of information and those resources as well for the great charities up in the northwest part of the state. We've also seen charities try to come up with new ways of repackaging their fundraising activities. And so those that are affected directly, that are involved in the response and relief to the coronavirus situation, I know have been sharing that information with their donors and saying, our services are in need more than ever. Can you help? Some groups have been converting what have been large event-based fundraisers into more online kinds of activities. And so we're seeing some creative approaches in that way too, to augment resource development efforts in new ways that they never thought about before. But we also know that there are going to be needs for some charities to take a real serious look at how we can shore things up quickly. And there needs to be caution. These are serious questions that board members need to make sure that they clearly understand what's going on. And there are some particular issues that they need to be particularly mindful of. Abby, could you talk about some of the specific issues that we certainly don't want to see developing?
Sure. So obviously these are crazy times. We need to often act fast to come up with fixes to ensure that we can continue to function. We're all going through that, right, in our work lives and our home lives, and charities too have to deal with that. So what charities need to remember is that their fiduciary duties haven't gone away, right? They continue to exist. And so they have to keep that in mind the whole time. So it becomes pretty easy to let things slide when you're just trying to make it work and charities have to remember that they really can't do that. So if, for example, a charity has a policy to require 2 signatures on a check, and they've realized that that doesn't work for them anymore because it's very, very hard with social distancing, the solution is not to just stop doing that. It's to come up with another policy or procedure that makes sure that the charity is protecting the organization's assets and reputation, and making sure that they're continuing to do the best for their charitable beneficiaries and purposes. So one thing I often stress when we're talking to charities is that you are capable of changing your own procedures and policies, right? They're yours. You wrote them for yourself. So go ahead and change them. Have a meeting, discuss what works better, and make that change. And then one other issue we've discussed that might arise in this situation is that there might be a temptation to take loans from board members or from other individuals in the organization. That's not something that is not permitted. It is not illegal, but it is absolutely something you're going to want to think carefully about, right? So you're now in a situation where maybe you're not getting that grant you thought you were going to get, or you can't hold that fundraiser you thought you were going to hold. And so you have to figure out a way to get money, and maybe the only way to get that money is from your members. That's not necessarily a problem, but you need to think about conflict of interest issues. You need to think of appearance of impropriety issues. You need to have fruitful, complete discussions with the board and with the individuals. You should put everything in writing. Always when you have meetings, you should be keeping meeting minutes. If you accept loans, if you create agreements between board members or other individuals, you need to have that in writing, have contracts, make sure you have it all planned out and thought out. And most important, really, in anything you do is to be transparent, right? You are holding public funds, you exist for the public, for the benefit of the people. You're doing great work. You should want to be transparent. We want you to be transparent. It makes everything better.
So, now is not the time to do less analysis of these decisions that you make. It's the time to be thinking extra hard about making sure you're doing it in the right way so that everyone knows the risks and benefits of, what may be some really, sharp turns you're going to have to make to maneuver these times. And so, indeed, if you're making unusual arrangements with people who are on your board, conflict of interest issues certainly apply, and you need to make sure you're doing that the right way and that the entire board understands what's happening and has decided that despite the unusualness of the transaction, whatever they're considering, that it is in the best interest of propelling the organization forward.
So get ready, Beth and Abby, because I think this might be somewhat of an unfair question. It's crystal ball gazing. If we think about the charitable sector as we emerge from the health crisis, the emergency health crisis, do you think it's going to look different in the charitable sector?
Absolutely. I think that we've already learned that we are a creative people and we're doing a lot of things now differently in ways that had never been done before, or our Jewish friends are celebrating Passover right now. We're approaching the Easter holiday, and we've been doing things online and remotely and having Zoom religious services and connecting families for these holidays through video chats and that sort of thing. And many times these kinds of technologies were always available and there was just a hesitancy about doing it, but it's provided new pathways to build relationships and maintain community, and that is always a good thing. So I think there will be a number of positive changes when we walk away from all this and the virus is just a memory of the past. I think that we will have jumped in boldly, and because we were forced to, in doing things in new and creative ways that may open up new opportunities for how we meet, how we provide connection, how we provide services, how we do fundraising, and all of that is likely to be positive changes. But there is no doubt that there will also be some contraction within the sector. There will be charities who cannot survive this. There will be charities who can't do business the way that they've always done and don't survive this. And so there are important ways when charities are thinking about some of the natural things we might expect to come out of this might be mergers or selling off assets or even going out of business. And there are provisions in the Ohio Revised Code that control how that has to be done, and it must be done in a mindful way. You can't just deal out what's left to everyone who's sitting around the board table at the end. You still have an obligation to protect whatever charitable resources have been entrusted to you, and so there are some particular legal exercises and processes that have to be approached. And Abby, can you walk people through what some of those might look like?
Sure. So if your organization is coming to a point where you've made the decision that you need to sell off a bunch of your assets, and so generally that's 50% or more of your assets. If you've decided to do that, you actually need to give our office notice at least 20 days before that happens. And then we'll go through a review process. We'll send a records request. We'll look at what you're planning to do with the money. We're going to make sure you're getting fair market value for the property you're selling off, or the assets you're selling. We always want to ensure that at the end of the charity's life, or when these big transactions are happening, that the organization is continuing to protect the charitable assets. So that's what we do if it is a transaction situation. If it's a merger or a combination, you may need to give us notice as well. It depends on how that merger or consolidation works out, and where the money ends up in the end. But that's also a situation where you may need to provide us notice, and there would be a review process as well. If your organization has decided that it's going to dissolve and cease to exist, you need to provide us with a form that we have to fill out information about where your assets are going, where the money's going. And you also have requirements then with the Secretary of State's office, if you're incorporated there, to go through your dissolution, certificate of dissolution, and that kind of stuff.
Then you have to also let the IRS know if you're going out of business as well. So if you're going out of business, you need to do it the right way, because we have had situations where people have gone in later. Everyone thinks a charity is shut down, but they actually didn't shut down the right way. And then you have some bad actors that walk on the scene 9 or 12 months later and resurrect the organization, and no one who was really connected with the original group knows anything about them. So if you're going out of business, go out of business gracefully and do it the right way.
Yes, because after all, the charity is entrusted with these assets and this mission on behalf of the community. So we want to make sure that everything is handled correctly. For those of you who are familiar with our site, our website, it's C4NPR.org, and there is a page out there with a number of the items that Abby had referenced around mergers, dissolutions, etc. So we'll make sure that that is up to date with the information that Abby had shared. So one final question for both Beth and Abby. What else would you like to share that you want to make sure our nonprofit leaders are aware of?
Well, again, I think it's really important to know that just because we may not be having our regular activities, it's not a time to stop doing board governance work and making sure that charitable leaders are on top of what's going on. They're being strategic about what next steps to take. It could be, I always want to give a shout out to the importance of board governance activities. And as you know, we have materials on our webpage that are related to board governance. There's a recorded webinar that people can watch. Maybe it's a good time for the board to get together, watch the webinar together, and sit down and decide if you need to develop new policies. Maybe you never had a disaster communication plan or process before. We certainly now know the importance of how those things can help during times like this. So groups are having to make enormous adjustments, but the board needs to be looped in on all that. So in many ways, now more than ever, the board has an important role to provide guidance to charities, and so check out the resources that are available on our webpage, on your webpage, and other places, because this is a time for some groups to be able to step back and say, are we positioned to be able to respond well when things change?
Abby, did you have something you'd like to share?
Sure. So I just want to reiterate a lot of what Beth said. It's a great time to do some board governance checkup, see what's going on, amend those policies, see if they still work for you. And if not, change them, right? And on top of that, our website now has some specific COVID-19 related information. So you can check out the Attorney General's website at ohioattorneygeneral.gov. And look at specific documents we have put together about what charities should be doing and thinking about now. And we're continuing to put together resources that we hope will be helpful. So continue to check that out. If you don't already subscribe to our newsletter, which Beth puts together and is wonderful, go on our website and subscribe. We put out a specific COVID-19 edition, a special edition. So you can check that out. It should be helpful. And there are various other helpful resources out there specifically related to what you need to be doing given this health crisis. And one of the best ones I've seen is philanthropyohio.org. Check that out. They have multiple pages devoted to the health emergency with helpful information. So there's a lot of resources out there. Use them wisely. And in the end, if you have a question, if you need something, if something comes up, it's something new, it's something novel, which I think is inevitable right now, contact us. We're happy to help as much as we can.
The other thing I forgot to mention, Heather, is that we're partnering with a professor from Ohio State who happens to be on our Charitable Advisory Council, and Professor Beaton and Philanthropy Ohio and our office are doing a statewide survey of charities, trying to get an idea of how the virus situation has impacted their operations, what changes they've had to make already or maybe planning to make. And we will be surveying the charities periodically as the months go forward, so we can get a better idea statewide about what the real impact has been and will be on our charitable sector. And we'll be sharing that information widely, because I think that policymakers, funders, foundations, and others, it will be helpful information to know what some of the secrets to success might be, and also to get a better idea of the needs. So folks should be looking for that survey, and I would ask you to complete it and share your story from your organization so that it is part of the entire story we're able to put together about what this has meant to charities.
Thank you for that work. We at the center are very interested to see some of the results. And we will do anything we can to encourage participation. If they reach out to you, please take the time to complete the survey. It's very important. Also, in preparation for this chat, you had provided a list of citations, and there'll be a link to that in the blog post. Do you want to let people know what they'll find in that list?
Abby, do you want to run down the statutory provisions that cover some of the things you talked about?
Sure. So I don't have it in front of me, so I'll just do it from memory and we'll see how that goes. There are citations to where your fiduciary duties come from in statute. There are citations to the Charitable Trust Act and the Charitable Solicitations Act. There are citations to all of the transaction and merger and dissolution language. So if you are a nonprofit corporation or an unincorporated nonprofit association or a hospital or nonprofit healthcare entity, there are very specific provisions in there about what you have to do if you are selling off a bunch of assets, merging, or anything like that. So those are in 1702, 109, and 1745. And there are specific citations for each situation you might come across.
Great. So it sounds like it's a quick and easy guide for people. They don't have to go hunting. They can check by topic in this really a one-page summary and find what they need. Is that what it is?
That's the hope.
Okay. Well, I really want to thank Beth Short and I want to call her Abigail, but it's Abby Jacobs, for your time and expertise. I know this is a very confusing time for you out there in nonprofit land. There's a lot of things changing. Just to circle back on a couple of things that were mentioned, if you are looking for a crisis communication plan, those of you who work with the center know we're a big fan of not reinventing the wheel. If you go out into the blog or just do a search on our website, Crisis Communication Plan, it will pull up the blog post related to that with samples. There's also a link. We also have a COVID-19 resource page. And if you are in Northwest Ohio listening to this, there are some very specific things that we're working with Toledo and Lucas County through the Emergency Management Center to make sure you're aware of how things work for our community. We are in direct contact with Representative Marcy Kaptur and making sure that we are current and can talk knowledgeably about resources and where to go. And there's just a lot out there. So those of you who interact with us know that we try to curate so that it's not so much drinking from the fire hose the way it is on information, but trying to vet through and help you find information easily. So thank you, Beth and Abby, for joining us today.
You know, Heather, I am such a fan of all the work that you and your team do, and Northwest Ohio is well served by your efforts. And so best wishes to all the charities that you work with, because, you know, charities affect our lives in so many ways. And so your work is even more important now than ever before. So thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Great. So thank you again for joining us for this episode of C4NPR Chat. You can learn more at our website at c4npr.org, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.